some time talking about where your waste goes when that garbage truck comes by the house and picks it up and takes it away. And so much of that waste in the United States goes to landfills still, and some of it is recycled, of course. Many of you have a recycling bin and a garbage bin, but for now we're going to discuss landfills. All of the non-recyclable waste that you put into your garbage can goes to a landfill most of the time in the United States. There are some exceptions. There are some areas that combust the waste, and so it's not always the landfill, but pretty much most people are serviced by a landfill. And the U.S. EPA defines a landfill as a discrete area of land or an excavation that receives household waste. In the past, pits were not always constructed, so the landfills used to be just old quarries, which is where they dug out rock for construction, or a natural gully. But now landfills are constructed because they have to meet very stringent criteria. And so open dumps where you would just dump waste into a depression are now illegal if they don't meet the landfill criteria, which they generally would not. So part of that is because we want to monitor the effect of having those wastes in the ground on the environment. You can't do that if you don't know where they are. So in the United States, still more than half of our solid waste ends up in a landfill, so we're still putting a lot of waste into the ground. In 2009, there were 1,908 licensed landfills in the United States, and that number is still what's on the EPA website. It has not been updated. So there might be more as of now, or possibly less even, as some have been decommissioned, but that's the approximate number. There are 7 main criteria for building an approved landfill. The first is the location, and of course nobody wants a landfill in their backyard, but there are certain criteria where you're allowed to put one. So you can't be in a floodplain or a wetland. You have to be on stable ground, so you can't put it on the side of a hill where you might have a landslide. You can't put it right on a fault line where you might have cracking of the landfill liner. And you can't put it too close to an airport because the birds are attracted to landfills, like seagulls. You may have noticed pigeons. If you've ever been near a landfill, you've seen that there's tons of birds that are trying to eat the garbage, and so that poses a hazard for planes. Okay, so when you're operating a landfill, there's a number of things you have to be aware of, and so one of them, you have to cover the waste every day. So when the trucks come in and bring all the waste, they deposit it, and then a layer of soil goes over that waste at the end of each day, so that pests can't come in, like the birds and the rats, and eat it overnight. So that's supposed to help control pests in the area. And then landfills give off an explosive gas called biogas, and that's because the waste that's in the landfills does not decompose aerobically. The landfills are packed very tightly, and so oxygen, air in general, has a hard time getting down into that tightly packed waste. And so as microorganisms go in and degrade that waste material, they have to do it anaerobically without oxygen, which leads to the production of this mixture of gases called a biogas. It contains methane, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide. As you can guess, because it has methane, this gas is highly flammable, and then if it's not vented properly, it will seep through the soil and rock, and then any vegetation that would be planted on the surface of a decommissioned landfill would die. Also, there's been cases where this landfill gas travels horizontally through the ground, and it can come up into people's basements, and it's caused explosions. So it has to be properly vented to keep those gases from going to where they're not supposed to go. Landfills are designed in a way that they're trying to limit the amount of water that gets into the landfill and filters through all of that garbage and gross material. The water that does get into a landfill tends to dissolve chemical waste as it travels through the garbage, and then at the bottom it's this lovely toxic soup of water with all kinds of dissolved chemicals in it, and that toxic soup is called leachate. All new landfills, they have to have a thick liner so it's this thick membrane that doesn't allow water to come through, and then 2 feet of compacted soil in the bottom, and then a leachate collection system where that water can drain out and they can treat it. And then, so once the water is treated, then it can be discharged to the environment. So in order to eliminate or prevent as much water from getting into the landfill, they tend to build them in a pyramidal shape, and that way the water just kind of runs off the top of the landfill and doesn't infiltrate down in as much. So this does reduce the amount of leachate, but we've said there's not much oxygen inside of this pile of waste, and now we're saying there's also not a lot of water, and so as a result, the organisms that might live in there and decompose the waste, they don't have water or oxygen, and so the decomposition of waste is very, very slow in landfills, in modern landfills. They also have to monitor the groundwater around a landfill to make sure none of that leachate is leaking out and contaminating local groundwater. And then if it is, then they have to implement a corrective action to clean up the surrounding groundwater and soil systems. So here you can see a picture of a modern landfill. This is from the EPA website. You can see that they have a well in place that monitors the groundwater underneath the landfill, making sure none of the leachate is leaked out. Trash is contained inside of this landfill liner that has a non-permeable membrane and a bunch of like clay soil. They have a leachate treatment system, so the leachate, the water that does get in, comes down through the garbage, is collected in the bottom, and is pumped out and treated. And then when they're done with that, when this landfill is decommissioned, soil is put over the top, they plant vegetation, and that helps to keep the landfill stable. And then finally, in order to prevent that biogas, the landfill gas, from seeping into other areas outside of the landfill, they put a vent right in the middle, or often there's many vents all around throughout the landfill where that gas can come off. Sometimes it's recovered and used to power, to create electricity, so it powers a turbo generator, which generates electricity for people to use in their homes. So we said when the landfill's full, they have to cap the landfill, and that was shown in the last picture. So generally a very thick layer of soil is added, and they plant some grass, generally not a lot of trees because they don't want them trying to go deep into the soil and down into the landfill itself. But grass and vegetation are planted. That helps to it holds the soil in place, prevents soil erosion, and that way it keeps the landfill from being exposed. And then whoever is running that landfill is responsible financially to keep monitoring it and make sure that it stays safe and closed and is not contaminating nearby environments. There are many different landfills around the country. We said there's about 1,900, and many of these are now being used to create electricity from the landfill gas or biogas. So people call it different things. Landfill gas here is LFG. So it's lovely because if you have this gas anyways, you may as well use it for something. So they're siphoning it off and then creating electricity from it. Landfills are indeed the third highest man-made source of methane emissions in the United States. And so it's very important because methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. It's very important for us not to just let it go out into the atmosphere. And that's second to, you might be able to guess, cows are a huge source of methane gas. Cows and their flatulence. But landfills are a major source, and so a lot of landfills now are starting to burn that gas and use it to create electricity. There's two other landfill issues that we should quickly discuss. One is the fact that the garbage does not decompose. So there's been I like this example, where they were digging in a landfill and they found a 30-year-old newspaper that you could still read the print on it, so that's how they knew it was 30 years old. It hadn't decomposed enough to even, wipe off the date, because this garbage, it just doesn't get very wet, and it can't decompose at the rate that it used to when it wasn't um, when it wasn't built in such a way to prevent water from getting in. Another issue is you can't put a building on top of a landfill because the waste, as it does break down and settle and get smushed, the whole land surface will settle. And so they tend to put, when a landfill is decommissioned, sometimes they'll put parks on it. You can put, like, if there's a school nearby, I know of a school that's nearby, they put a track on top of the landfill. So you can put parks there, you just can't put big buildings. So it has to be kind of an environment that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure on it.